Trauma Therapist Podcast Plus listeners can listen to episodes early and ad-free right now. Become a Plus listener by going to Apple Podcasts, searching for the Trauma Therapist Podcast, and signing up today. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. So here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Mimi Savage. Mimi, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You're welcome. Awesome. So Mimi is a registered drama therapist and board certified trainer who's an associate professor at California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco in the Master of Counseling, Psychology, and Expressive Arts program. She's a core faculty member teaching courses as human development and family, group dynamics, arts and therapy, and professional development. She's also one of the contributors to the new book coming out by Susan Pease Bannett titled Women Therapists on Healing. Mimi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
So before we get going, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I wish that was an easy response. It should be, right? I'm an Army brat. So where am I from? I was born in Fort Lewis, Washington. So that's Seattle. I spent a lot of time in Northern California where my parents reside. They're elderly there. And also stayed in Europe till I was about 8 years old, until I had to come back to America because the soldiers were asked to come back. And then my father went to Vietnam. So my experience is not a straightforward shoot. You know, I was born in Wisconsin or whatever. I've been everywhere. A bit of a vagabond. And now I reside in Los Angeles with my family, stayed in California. Yeah. Lived in New York for a long time too. Studied there, went to school back east.
Awesome. So we'll talk about the book and your contribution to it. But before we do, I'm curious, before we started, you mentioned that you're a registered drama therapist, licensed drama therapist, and of which there are a few. How did that start for you? Where did that interest for you start?
Yeah, the theme today might be circuitous. That might be the theme because
that's always my theme.
Again, it's not a straight shoot, and which is exciting in life, right? Although I have students who know exactly what they want to do, and they're in school, getting their master's. They have it all planned out. I went to Princeton and was a comparative literature major, studying theater and French languages, and then I went to acting conservatory in New York, the Neighborhood Playhouse, famed for Sandy Meisner in those days. And then I ended up doing regional theater, and then I ended up in Hollywood, and I ended up acting on television, commercials, and mostly television, sitcom, comedy. I studied clowning. That was my passion. And then the LA uprising occurred, and I found myself working with children and teaching artistry positions and doing advocacy work, and still a professional actor. And then the world, it was topsy-turvy. So somehow I found drama therapy through a professor at the time at Cal State University, Los Angeles. And I started understanding, and I always knew this, that theater and the arts, and catharsis had something to do with well-being. I knew there was something about not just being in the audience and also for the actor, but there was this interaction, and this interaction had something to do with something was happening therapeutically. So I found drama therapy. The story is what I just shared is so common. I didn't know it existed. I found it. It found me. And then I studied it and was a teaching artist for quite some time. And then eventually ended up in acute settings like the psychiatric units, and then forged forward and got a PhD. So again, it was a circuitous way. I didn't know about it. I landed, and I also have mostly worked in acute settings with neurodiverse folks, residential treatment, creating programs and in acute settings for children and adults. That's been my world until really now steeping into academia where I can offer my knowledge in that way.
Now, when we hear the term drama therapy, I think we can come up with an explanation or definition of that.
Right.
Seemingly, it sounds simple, but how do you describe or define drama therapy? What is it?
Right. It's an intentional use of the theater arts and anthropology and all that has to do with performance in a therapeutic manner realm for that. It's not happenstance. It's we have research. I'm a researcher. There's empirical research as to what happens neurologically, physically, and the two are combined, two are connected. So it's an intentional use. It's not far from art therapy, music therapy, poetry therapy, and dance movement because the theater encompasses all of those, art forms. So we feel fortunate because we can use everything in the kitchen sink. There are different methods of drama therapy. Some are mostly an embodied way of working with improvisation, and others use sand tray and other externalizing ways of working. I mean, that's at the core of what we do is an externalizing way of working. That trauma is locked inside of us, and so we want to put it out there so we can see it. We all are familiar with the empty chair. That's very psychodramatic. That's our roots or psychodrama with Jacob Moreno. That's what we do. We do psychodrama, but it's also mostly with groups. We do one-on-one. And it's not just one person's story. The endeavor for drama therapy is to include everyone in the room. So yeah, there's different methods, but our intention is all the same, that intentional use.
So let's get a little more specific. What might it look like, given with the understanding that it could look many different ways,
Right.
But give us an example of in a group. What would it look like? How might it look
Right.
like?
So I'm trained narratively. So the way I was trained is what they call narrow drama. It's now for me changed through my research and, morphed into my own way of working narratively. But let's say I'm in the acute setting with a higher functioning group of men, which is common for me in those days. And you have people there, obviously, who are either suicidal or homicidal, right? It's in the most acute situations that they're there, and there's depression, there's everything is in the room. Actually, that's a great way to learn everything. There's schizophrenia, there's schizoaffective behavior, there's bipolar disorder. It's all in the room at the same time. It's not for everyone because it's very triage way of working, but I think having improvisation in my background and that kind of training kept me on my toes and able. I had interns that came in and went, no, this is not for me. I can't. I can't.
I can imagine.
I can't do this thing. So let's say that's the environment, that's the milieu, that's the population. And let's say you have, a person who says, I'm going to kill myself, and of course we already have had the terrorists off. We know everything is set. The person is safe. They're there. They've already attempted suicide, and, it's their prerogative to think that. But, I would say something along the lines is, well, let's see if there's an option. And every group, I think of them as workshop, has a format, a warming in, a warm up, a central activity or central part of the group, and then a closure. Right. And that's the microcosm. And it's at the macro. You might have 12 weeks working with a group of folks. I worked on Skid Row with unhoused women for 3 years.
Wow.
I was hired for a documentary, and the same thing happened, although there I wasn't privy to medical records, et cetera. It was an open door policy. So that was a whole different thing, but that's the setup. So here's this person who comes in, he says, I'm going to kill myself, or somebody else comes in and, off the gurney, which is ridiculous, and, on heroin still. And let's just take those two examples. Maybe for that one person, once the whole entire group is there, and we've warmed it up, and maybe some improv of where we're just sharing where we are today with a talking stick, or maybe where I've placed images on the wall, of scenarios of people, dyads, people, in scenes, and they just share what they see. And then maybe we can enact those scenes, or maybe we can just speak to a figure in that scene that brings out what's going on with them today. I'm just riffing off of this. And then maybe I put a lot of fabric on the floor, like loads of fabric, and they pick up one that means something to them today, or maybe not, it means nothing. Maybe they're on their podium today, or their soapbox, and they give that talk that they need to talk to someone. Maybe they write a letter to someone who's passed, or someone that they haven't been able to speak to, because a lot of people have been incarcerated. It's a forensic setting. So there's all of that. And then there's that gentleman who says, I have nothing to live for. And maybe we do an improv where he steps out and I have confetti. He steps in and we give him a surprise party. That moment is real. He experiences it. And then maybe we do the supper he never had with his long lost children. And literally this has happened. He said, well, now you've given me some food for thought, Mimi. I haven't known that feeling before. I've never had a surprise party. I've never had that. I'm getting a little touched by remembering this man I haven't forgotten. Or the person who got off the gurney who's using heroin, and I sit in the hot seat and I'm heroin. And he speaks to me and I'm seductive. And I'm like, you don't want to quit me, because I do. I'm like, come on, you've said it before. Come on, you're here right now. Why? And then we role reverse. He sits in the hot seat of heroin and he speaks to me as I'm him. And that back and forth gives you perspective, right? Right away.
That's
Feel that, right?
Yeah. Let me just hold you for a second here. This is so intense. I love this. There's such a sense of immediacy and being in the moment, and having to be okay with that, right? And having to being able to trust your own instincts and what's coming from the other person. When you talked about that, excuse me, the gentleman who maybe said he wanted to commit suicide, and you offered that situation where he came through the door and you threw confetti. That's so amazing. What are the other people doing at that point? What might they be doing or called upon to do?
So it goes back to group dynamics, right? We don't want to do the one person therapy in a group. In a group, we're taking care of the one and the many, right? And we want group consensus. We want mutual aid. So the rest of the players are auxiliary players. That's what Jacob Moreno would say, because this is very psychodramatic. It is one person's story in that moment, but isn't it everyone's story? Because they're all there for basically the same reason. I mean, this is the last hurrah. This is it, right? So they're playing the parts of the neighbor or whomever. They're giving, right, and witnessing. And then they're also processing. We always process, right? It's not as if talk therapy isn't part of the deal. So unpacking what happened, and other people witnessing or saying, I know that feeling. So they're part of that mutual aid. They're part of that exploration, witnessing, all of the things, even human development wise, we need to be witnessed. How many of these folks who are where they are, it's a journey, a long journey of trauma, right? Of not being seen, of not being held. It's trauma. It's all trauma. Whether we're working with the children or working with, an older population. And so they're part of that processing, right? And part of also chiming in, there's that, here's the theater, right? You've got the chorus. It's like the Greek chorus. That's a setup where the chorus says something that player needs to hear, and that happens. or you can look at it as an orchestra, but we're all part of the story. We're all part of working together. I'm just the guide and the facilitator. I'm the director. Sometimes I'm in it, sometimes I'm on the side
Hmm.
lines, but I'm guiding it. Yeah, there's so many ways to go in, narrative ways of approaching. For me, it's about the story, and the problem is not the person, but the problem is the
Hmm.
problem, right? And the problem saturated self-identity issues that are prevail in a setting like that. It's why we're there, right? So that's what we're looking at. And I like using all of these different tools. I have colleagues who do a method called developmental transformations, where it's ideal for one-on-one work, private practice, although they've used it in different settings now. It's expanded in the way that they approach it, but the person walks in and basically it's improvisational from the get-go.
Wow.
There's no processing. There's just, who are you? Who am I? Who are you? And then you can play the perpetrator. It switches, then you become the instigator, and then you become the victim. And it takes a lot of training for that way of working. It doesn't really work ideally in the settings that I was in because things are fast in my setting, right?
Right.
Someone is here today, someone's gone tomorrow. You might have a group of people who are staying for quite a while and they support each other. So I was lucky. The way I was trained fit the environment that I was in.
When you first started doing this, I would imagine it's one thing to be an actress and to have that orientation, but it's and to study, and it's another thing to be immersed in that type of work, in that type of setting. What was that like for you when you first started? What were some of the challenges maybe that you came up against?
Well, systems, I didn't realize when I was in the hospital, it was my partner at the time at one day, because I'd leave at lunch and I can't believe the way, what's going on in this environment, and people are, and my partner said, you're in a corporate environment. I'm like, no, I'm in a hospital. And he said, no, you're in a corporate environment. This is corporate. It's systemized. And I'm like, oh, because as the actor in me, who was taught, um, through a collaborative way of working, but also a very, I would say that the way I was trained in New York was very hardcore. You know, it has nothing to do with it has everything to do with your own psychology and finding all the trauma and the dark and the light that's inside of you, but has nothing to do with taking care of you, right? But
Hmm.
I didn't understand. I thought, oh, there's a barn, put on a show. I'm here, and I bumped heads a lot. I got into trouble a lot. It was, oh, there
Hmm.
she is. We want her, but she's a troublemaker. And eventually I learned, I had a supervisor who was actually an occupational therapist, a doctorate in OT. And, she said, one day you're going to be in a position of leadership, and, you got to know how to work with. And it wasn't as if I was, so self-centered. It's just, I just didn't get how to work in the system. And then that is actually what spurred me on to get a PhD for a couple of things. One, I saw with the children, it was mostly the children. Nothing was really happening with them. There was some Jenga and OT work that was pretty minimal. And not to poo-poo that, it was just play therapy wasn't a part of that world when I got there. I think early on in the 70s, they had a lot of play therapy and things like that for the kids, but I knew that I could do something.
Hmm.
And so I made a lot of proposals, and finally I was in the children's unit. And there I noticed a disproportionate amount of foster care kids. And I thought, well, it's not like all foster care, all kids, and they were Black and brown. I'm a biracial woman. I identify as a Black woman. And I thought, this is really strange. And then I started understanding, the finances around this and how hospitals keep abreast how they benefit from big pharma and foster care, and the pipeline from foster care to incarceration. And then I got really incensed and also curious, and that's what really spurred on, along with understanding the systems that we do we buy into them? Do we work with them? We have to pay our rent, our mortgage. How do we
Hmm.
balance that? And I came across a book by Parker Palmer, Courage to Teach, I think. And there's a passage in it where he speaks of the Rosa Parks moment, where, she gets on the bus and she has to decide, because other people had tried it. She has to decide on this day that, she's going to get on that bus and she's not going to move. She's going to say, no, today's the day. And it's that moment that I had at the hospital where I went, well, you've been here, you see what's going on. What are you going to do about it? It kind of harkens back to what I said about the LA uprising too. Like, what are you going to do about it, Mimi?
Hmm.
Because, you could talk the talk, but are you going to walk the walk? It's a big decision. And how are you going to do it? Because you still have to pay your bills. So yeah, I mean, that's what I'd share about that bumping heads or how did I deal with it. It is not an environment that I think is healthy for everyone. I speak for myself for long term. Um, but I also sometimes miss it dearly because it is a wacky place and
Hmm.
you're on your toes and there's an adrenaline rush. And then there's just so much. I will say that while I was there, the trauma that I had encountered as a young person seemed to dissipate. I understood the world really well. And that's not, like I said, for everyone.
Um, so let's talk about this book that's coming out together by Susan Pease Bannett. It's called Woman
Right.
Therapist on Healing. It's going to be released. Um, Susan said November 2024 from North Atlantic Books. How did you get involved in
Right.
this? And what's your contribution?
Right. So I got involved because I met Susan I was deeply for a decade and still am involved with my family called the Drama Therapists, so the North American Drama Therapy Association. And we've been around for 48 years. And so I was a regional representative of that organization, the NADTA. Anybody who's interested in drama therapy, look that up. I was education chair, et cetera, on the board. And so I created a regional conference in Oregon. And Susan happened to be there. We reached out and asked for people, if they wanted to have vendor tables, et cetera. And she was there with her books. And she happened to just hand me her books at the end because I was chairing that with some colleagues. And I'm like, oh, thank you. And I didn't even look at the books for a while. And then I had this gig where I was teaching as an adjunct at the time. And I saw this book she wrote, Wisdom, Attachment, and Love in Trauma Therapy Beyond Evidence-Based Practice. I'm like, oh, that's a great title. I'm going to open this book. It just been sitting there collecting dust. And I'm like, oh, wow, I'm going to teach out of this book. And then I asked her, hey, remember me? She goes, of course. I'm like, would you mind just, doing a guest lecture for my students? She goes, oh, I'd love it. And then it just kept building from that moment. So then we just hit it off. We understood each other. I mean, the work that she does is phenomenal. What the worlds that she's encountered, talk about my acute setting, what she's done with her clients who, have been victimized with organizations that have, kidnapped folks. It's just, cults
Mhm.
is amazing. She's retired from that now, but she was the one who said, I think you have something to contribute to this book. And I'm like, really? Okay. And she knew that I had been published already. And so my contribution to this is the title is called bricolage. And that's not something I coined. It means, a hodgepodge of collecting things, bricolage. And the title is Bricolage on Being Enough, Healing Through Narrative Co-Construction. And that's my contribution in the chapter section about disassociation and remembering. She has 3 sections, and I'm sure she's
Mhm.
told you about it in the book. But they're stories coming from ourselves and also our knowledge as therapists. And, I had a lot of trauma occur in my early youth. Um, just some from the environment that I was in, and others that, were from family. And it was interesting writing this chapter because I start off with a memory of my grandmother in the South. I'd lived with her for a year with my mother, who is a French woman. It was the first time we lived in America, so her English was terrible. But anyway, what was going on with, culturally, what was going on with previous trauma, what was going on with her, and I start off with just a memory, a picture that I describe of my grandmother doing laundry for a white family, and knowing at the age of 8 that there was tension, there was something going on in there. And that just triggers in this chapter a whole journey of dealing with disassociation, dealing with trauma, dealing with what's going on in the environment that contributes to trauma, but also how that triggers and the internalized trauma that I carry, right? And so, yeah, and also some of I'm keen on, because as a drama therapist, I get excited and I'm keen on inventing interactive experiential ways of working, in externalizing ways of working. So I write about a way of working called the poetic home that I devised, a way of getting the story outside of yourself so that you can look at it, and also create the ideal environment that you want to embrace. So that's in the chapter, because I did that with the women who were unhoused and Skid Row, and many times in other workshops. So that's my contribution. It's a bit poetic in its vibe. I'll say it's not it's not something that it's not a way of writing that I've done before, because it has memoir in it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I love that you brought or bring a part of yourself to that work. I mean, you just seem like such a passionate, interesting person that I think you could feel it just by talking to you, Mimi, and I think that's such an awesome part of you that can become so healing for people listening and reading your work. As we kind of wind down here, can you share just a little bit about, and you've talked before in this interview about the importance of externalizing. What does that look like sometimes? What can that look like? What does that mean?
The word that comes up for me right now when you ask that, and thank you for what you just said, that really, it warms my heart. I feel it right here. It's all embodied ways of working. That's what I'm addicted to. It's somatic, and you know what that's about. That's, if we take that pause and that breath, and we let things in and let things out, what else is there? But with that, saying that, the word that comes up for me is buffer. That's the externalizing way of working, that projective way of working, so that I can put that stuff out onto something else. And isn't that an easier way of dealing with my hurt, my pain, my layered trauma, right? I can start unlayering it and project it onto. And we're going back to human development again about projective, identification, or just projecting onto, right? And the mother, the gaze, the parent, the ideal, the good enough, going back to Winnicott, we need that. We've got that projected onto us, but we also need to project out when it comes to trauma. What are we going to do with it? It's just going to stay and fester within, right? We know that, and all of the things that happen. So that embodied way of working for me is just a natural way of working. I know for myself, I could just talk around it. And if I don't, I'm with a Jungian, for instance, who allows me to just stop, breathe, find those images that speak to me, and actually encourages me to do my art. I'm not just, I paint, I take photographs, I do everything, so that I can heal. And that's what I encourage my clients and also my students. They work by doing. They learn by doing in the program that I teach at CIIS, which is all about expressive therapies. But obviously, the Board of Behavioral Sciences needs all of the courses also to be met. So they come in with that ability to express in whichever way is needed. But also it's prescriptive too. It's not just willy-nilly, just do whatever, because things are not right for certain clients and for certain needs. So did I answer your question?
You did. Well, look, so good talking to you. How can people get in contact with you? What's the best way?
Yeah, I think the best way is through my university email, and that would be M as in Mimi, M Savage, SAVAGE, at CIIS.edu. The other way is I have a pretty defunct website. It's under SoCal Drama Therapy Center. If you try to reach me, you'll see lots of stuff on that, and you can reach me through that. But yeah, a direct email is a great way to reach me if you want to know more about expressive therapies. That's my Ph.D., as a matter of fact, and or drama therapy. I'm more than happy to help, and I mentor many. So yeah, It's my pleasure.
Well, awesome talking to you, and you're welcome back here anytime. I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This has been great. I love it.
All right. Take care.